Okay, so we really last week we finished the first parak of Peah. Let's go over again the last Mishnah. So this last Mishnah is based on the premise that the obligation to give Maaser, Truma and Maaser really, but Maaser, it only begins once the crop has been processed to the point where it's in its grain form. It's no longer a unprocessed crop, and when it reaches that point, we're going to have a bunch of dinim in this Mishnah that switch at that point. But first, we start with the topical one. If one did not leave the Peah attached to the ground, he can give it at any further point along in the process. Or he must give it even though he's further along in the process. And if he gives it right after the harvest, let's say, there would be no obligation on the poor that take it to give Maaser from it, and shimriach, until it reaches the point where he smooths out the pile of grain. At that point, he would first have to give Maaser, and only then could he give some of his remaining grain as Peah. Or another case when once he makes it into a pile, the status changes. V'naisin mishum hefker. One could just declare a portion of his crop ownerless, either because he wants to make it available to the poor, or because he doesn't want to deal with it. Either one would work. Upater min Maaser, and whoever gets it would not have to give Maaser from it. Again, it's only ad shimriach, it's only until he makes it into a pile, because once there's an obligation for him to give Maaser, he has to discharge the obligation before he does anything else with it. He can feed it to domesticated wild animals or birds. Again, same idea. Once it's in a pile, he has to first give the Maaser, and then he can do whatever he wants to do with it. He could take grain that's not fully processed and go plant it. And he doesn't have to give Maaser ad shimriach. On this one, the Rabbanan don't agree, because they say it's you should give Maaser before you plant anything. Kohen v'Levi, a Kohen or Levi, shalakhu as a goren, who buy some Maaser shlem, if they buy someone else's harvested crop, they can keep the Maaser or Truma in that crop. And shimriach, if they bought it before it was obligated in Maaser, if there's already an obligation of Maaser, then we kind of see them as buying the Maaser, which is not okay, so we would make them give that Maaser to somebody else.
Here, where are we at? What chapter are we at?
The very end of the first chapter. We've got one more line left, then we're going to start the second chapter.
Okay.
Hekdesh upaid, if one sanctifies his field and then he redeems it, he's chayav b'maasers, he would be obligated to separate Maaser ad shimriach hagizbor, unless the treasurer had made it into the stage of grain, because if he had done it, and this was a little bit different, then since Hekdesh does not have an obligation to give Maaser, it's only on individuals. So if one were to sanctify their field, and the treasurer of Hekdesh would hire workers to harvest the field and get to the stage where it's considered grain, that grain would be exempt from Maaser, because Hekdesh doesn't have an obligation to give Maaser, and anyone who bought processed grain from Hekdesh would get that same dispensation, that they would not have to give Maaser. But if they bought it before that stage, when it would normally become Maaser for a regular individual, they would still have to give Maaser, even though Hekdesh had owned it at some point. Okay. Now, let's begin the second parak. The second parak is defining what is considered one field and what's considered two fields. That do you have to give one Peah for the whole whatever? We'll just pick wheat for simplicity's sake. I'm growing a bunch of wheat, and there's different things in the middle. Which things are considered two fields and which ones are considered one? So the Mishnah begins, Ve'elu mafsikin lePeah. The following things are considered separations for Peah, that you would have to give a Peah on either side of them. Hanachal, if you have a river or a stream, that would break the area on either side of it to be considered two separate fields, and you'd have to leave a Peah on either side. V'hashilos, a shlilos is a canal. It's a man-made stream that's like the central part of your irrigation system, and off of that you have smaller irrigation ditches that come off. So that's, again, it's a bigger sort of thing that would split it. V'derech hayachid, if I have my private path that I use to cut through my field, that also would be considered a a demarcator essentially that makes the two sides two different fields. The derech harabim, or if it was a public path, or v'shvil harabim, v'shvil hayachid, or if it's not a derech, it's not as it's not like a road. It's just more like a temporary path. It still would be a split as long as hakavud b'meisacham b'meisachasham, as long as it's used summer and winter, as long as it's a all season sort of path. If it's something that you would only use in the summer months when it's less muddy in the fields, then that would not be considered such a clear thing, and that would not split the fields for Peah. The habor, if you leave some of your field fallow, if there's a part of the field that you didn't work, that would split what's on either side of it from each other. The hanir, or if you just plowed it and didn't plant it, that would be the same thing. If you plant, if you're rotating your crops, so if you didn't plant something in a middle section of your field, that would make the two sides separate, and you have to give a separate payer for each side. V'zera acher, or if you plant a different type in between, you have two wheat crops, and you plant, I don't know, you plant beans in the middle, so that the other crop in the middle would split the two similar crops. Or if you cut some of the wheat on, let's say, the middle section of your field again, to feed the greens to your animals, and it'll grow again, and you'll harvest again. Div Reb Meir. So Reb Meir says that's considered a hefsek, and the explanation is the Rabbanan say no. Really, you're growing wheat in all the fields, and when you harvest the green to just feed your animals, that's not considered anything. And whatever, and you're going to harvest later when it grows back, you'll harvest it as wheat. Unless after you cut it down for shachas, you plow the ground, so that would prevent any further growth. So it's not going to end up developing further into wheat. So that would be then the fact that you harvested some just as animal food and not as grain would make it considered a different crop. But if you cut it down as grass and then it's going to grow back as wheat, so that would not be considered a separate crop, and you would give one peah for the whole area. Okay, let's stop here. We'll see this Mishnah again tomorrow.
Do you think that term for a channel,
Shlilas?
Shlilas also applies to like a canal, a deep, full canal? Is that everything from a little brook to a canal?